This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets. The potent greenhouse gas methane is spewing out of natural gas infrastructure across the European Union because of leaks and venting, video footage made available to Reuters shows. Using a €100,000, $119,000, infrared camera, non-profit Clean Air Task Force, CATF, found methane seeping into the atmosphere at 123 oil and gas sites in Austria, Czech Republic, Germany, Hungary, Italy, Poland and Romania this year. Methane, the biggest cause of climate change after carbon dioxide, CO2, is the main component of natural gas and over 80 times more potent than CO2 in its first 20 years in the air.
U.S. crude and gasoline stocks fell sharply last week, even as refining activity dipped modestly, with demand continuing to grow, the U.S. Energy Information Administration said on Wednesday. Crude inventories fell by 7.6 million barrels in the week to June 18 to 459.1 million barrels, their lowest since March 2020. The draw was nearly double analysts' expectations in a Reuters poll for a 3.9 million barrel drop. Crude inventories are down by 9% since mid-March as refiners have boosted activity in advance of peak driving season and rebounding economic activity.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
The share of Middle Eastern crude in India's oil imports fell to a 25-month low in May, tanker data provided by trade sources showed, as refiners tapped alternatives in response to the government's call to diversify supplies. India, the world's third biggest oil importer, in March directed refiners to diversify crude sources after the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, and its allies, led by top exporter Saudi Arabia, ignored New Delhi's call to ease supply curbs. Asia's third-largest economy imported about 4.2 million barrels per day, BPD, of oil in May, just below the previous month but about 31.5% higher than a year earlier, the data showed.
Indian Oil Minister Dharmendra Pradhan on Thursday again urged the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries to phase out crude output cuts as high prices are stoking inflation. India, the world's third biggest oil importer and consumer, relies on overseas supplies for over 80% of its oil needs. Indian retail fuel prices have jumped to a record high due to higher oil prices and heavy local taxes. In a series of tweets after a virtual meeting with OPEC Secretary General Mohammed Sanusi Barkindo, Pradhan said oil prices should remain within a reasonable band to encourage a consumption-led recovery from the coronavirus pandemic.
Next, we have the top news in metal markets.
Russia is preparing new export taxes for steel products, nickel, aluminium and copper which will cost their producers $2.3 billion between August 1 and December 31, its officials told a government meeting on Thursday. Moscow wants to protect its defense and construction industries from further growth in raw materials costs as prices for metals rise at a global level. Our economy is not ready for the kind of avalanche-like shock transfer of global prices to the domestic market that we have seen over the past year, First Deputy Prime Minister Andrei Belousov said.
Indonesia is considering a plan to restrict construction of smelters producing nickel pig iron or ferronickel in order to optimize use of its limited nickel ore reserves for higher value products, a senior mining ministry official said on Thursday. Indonesia is currently the biggest producer of the two crude metals, and a restriction on more smelters coming online could hit Chinese stainless steel producers who are among biggest customers for Indonesia's relatively cheaper materials. Restricting construction of new smelters is deemed necessary because of limited reserves of saprolite nickel ore, Ridwan Jamaluddin, a senior official at Energy and Mineral Resources Ministry, told Reuters as the government discussed the plan with a parliamentary committee. We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector. The International Grains Council, IGC, on Thursday raised its forecast for global corn, maize production in the 2021-22 season, mainly driven by an improved outlook for number 2 producer China. In its monthly update, The intergovernmental body raised its global corn production outlook by 7 million tons to a record 1.201 billion tons. It raised China's 2021-22 corn crop forecast to 272.8 million tons from 267.3 million. The IGC trimmed its forecast for the 2021-22 global wheat crop by 1 million ton to a still record 789 million tons.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.